years back when I was there, we were launching the Lego Mindstorms robotics platform version 2. It was at that point, the version 1 was 10 years old. Any technology product that hasn't really been designed for the long term, and certainly 1.0 wasn't. It was designed as a kind of a kid's toy to bring robotics to children, right? Well, of course, the adult fan community had picked it up and had done amazing things with it, right? I'm sure you've seen things like the Rubik's Cube solver and, the printer that would actually write with a pen, based on whatever image you put in. I had heard from the product team that this version 2.0 that they were working on in secret at that point was not going to be backwards compatible at all. There's a couple of options when you tell an audience, hey, guess what? All this energy and money you've put into and time you put into this particular thing, you're going to have to start over. You can go one of two ways. Is it amazing enough for me to be excited about it? Or I hate you and I want to burn the factory down, right? And there were some representative voices seeing that before it actually launched, that we were going to have the villagers at the castle gates with pitchforks and torches.
So Jake, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We were introduced a few years back through a mutual friend, Rebecca Marshburn. She's head of community at Common Room. And that was pretty early in General Collaboration's journey, but we've stayed in touch since then. And now that GC is publicly launched, it's a perfect time for us to catch up. And I know that you've been working in community for ages now, since like 1996. You've been working in a community since before it was popular. You really helped grow communities. I know some of the logos on your website are places like Apple and Lego and Southwest Airlines. And today we're going to talk about community-driven product development. So Jake, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here and to catch up.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the launch. It's been a few weeks now, right?
Yeah, we launched, actually, it's almost exactly a month ago as we record this.
Nice.
It's been a whirlwind. So I'm excited for this show today. We're going to kind of dive into understanding what community-driven product management is, but then also kind of get tactical and talk about things in terms of some past case studies and examples of companies you've worked with, and even have you pick apart what we're doing at General Collaboration a bit as a case study. But maybe to start things off, community-driven product development. What is it? How do you define it?
So it is a framework or methodology for how I think about the best way to sort of bring product and community disciplines together. The story I like to tell about this is that to radically simplify product development, you kind of have three stages, right? You start off with a collection activity where you collect up your specs, your customer research, your voice of the customer reports, your, budgets, whatever it is that you need to have on hand in order to sort of disappear into stage 2, which is typically a black box of product development, right? And you take everything you've collected, you jump into this black box, you kick the door shut behind you, and you say, okay, we're going to get after it, right? We're going to develop something. And then some number of days or months or weeks later, you pop out and you get into stage 3, which is verification, right? Is what we built good? But there's a huge chasm in between those two bookends that things can go sideways, right? And I've worked with a lot of product development teams over the years, and there's a fairly regular reality check when they hit that verification stage of, man, I wish we'd known this earlier. How did we miss this in our development cycle? Man, we were so heads down that we didn't really think about beyond the technical development piece. How were people going to really use this, right? We may have popped our heads out of the black box to do a little bit more collection, right? Every once in a while, teams will do some user testing, right? Or they'll go to the two-way mirror usability testing room and watch some people use some things. But that's a different kind of activity, right? All that's important, those voice of the customer research reports, the usability testing, the UX design testing, beta testing at the end, all that's important. But the piece that I believe as a community guy is often missed is, how do we put some warm bodies, metaphorically and sometimes literally, next to the development team as they're developing, right? So that that team has a relational, ongoing relationship with a group of people, typically small groups of people, easier to manage that way, but small groups of people that they can say, "Hey, here's what we're working on. What do you think?" Right? That maintains that some level of knowledge and insight into what's happening, so it's not a completely context-free type of test or feedback. But it's also kind of arm's length from the actual development process and the rigors of the internal issues of development teams and politics and budgets and all that stuff. So it's this really nice middle ground to really understand how what we're developing is going as we're developing it, instead of at the end, right, when we're testing to make sure that it was all good.
Mm-hmm. It's so much. It's one of those things that's so much easier said than done. I'd love to just jump right into like, what are a few quick examples to really take this and paint a picture of what it looks like tactically, of a case study or two of examples where we've seen companies do this really well.
Yeah, yeah, and let's talk about two different ones. So, one of my all-time favorites is you mentioned Lego. You know, it's hard not to love talking about Lego because it's such a great company and product, right? But years back when I was there, we were launching the Lego Mindstorms robotics platform version 2. It was at that point, the version 1 was 10 years old. Any technology product that hasn't really been designed for the long term, and certainly 1.0 wasn't. It was designed as a kind of a kid's toy to bring robotics to children, right? Well, of course, the adult fan community had picked it up and had done amazing things with it, right? I'm sure you've seen things like the Rubik's Cube solver and, the printer that would actually write with a pen, based on whatever image you put in, like just amazing things, absolutely amazing things that have been done. And there was this very active adult fan base that had spent tens of thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of hours doing amazing things. And I had heard from the product team that this version 2.0 that they were working on in secret at that point was not going to be backwards compatible at all. So all that time, all that money, all that energy put into the 1.0 product was basically going to have to go away and start over. And there's a couple of options when you tell an audience, "Hey, guess what? All this energy and money you've put into and time you put into this particular thing, you're going to have to start over." You can go one of two ways. Is it amazing enough for me to be excited about it? Or I hate you and I want to burn the factory down, right? There's not a lot of in between on that one. And I knew that without doing some work to make sure that the awesomeness of the new product was clear, and there were some representative voices seeing that before it actually launched, that we were going to have the villagers at the castle gates with pitchforks and torches. And so we built a very small program, started off with 4 people. It took me 3 months to find the right 4 people. And I extended a lot of my political capital inside to get those folks into the product team, side by side with the product team. Mm-hmm. And the product team initially said that, I don't know that they can really help us much.
These are external. These are just like Lego fans that are hanging out with. Wow, cool.
Adult fans, totally not working for the company, just, community members that were excited about the product.
Wow.
But it took me 3 months to find them because I specifically wanted to find people that knew things specific to the product, right? That was important. It wasn't just adult fans. It was people that were really smart about the product. Number one. Number two, that there were representative voices from the community, so that since I could only pick a couple, I couldn't bring in this large community of people. I needed to make sure that when those names got announced, that everybody said, I'm sad I didn't get invited, but that's fair. I understand why those guys did. I'm listening. They represent me, right? Mm-hmm. And 3 was, I knew I had to make sure that those people we selected, socially, the way that they think, the way that they work on the things that they did, that would connect with the product team, right? Yeah. I didn't want to put some, a group of people in that the product team kind of went, I don't know about these guys. So I found a great group of four guys. One was a mechanical engineer who made his own sensors. One was a software engineer who wrote some of the hacked software for the 1.0 device. One was a guy that was very big in the community and known for doing really cool projects. And one was a guy who spent a lot of time doing events, right? Kind of covered all the bases with that representation. Mm-hmm. And we put them in. There was four people. Took a little while for the product team, as they often do, to sort of embrace them. And as soon as they started seeing man, these guys are actually really intelligent. When we give them more insights, they give us back better feedback, right? The mechanical engineer was submitting design drawings. The software guy was submitting code snippets, right? Like they were really there with the product team.
Mhm.
And in fact, so much so that the product team, after a couple of months, said, "Hey, can we get some more folks into this?" And we added 5 more. So
Wow.
when we launched, about 8 or 10 months after that, we launched with 9 people in the program, and there was a very brief blip in the community of what do you mean it's not backwards compatible? Oh wait, Ralph, John, Steve, Dave, those guys are involved with this. Interesting. Tell me more.
Mhm.
Right, and it was very much that lean in mindset, and that product has been going since. It's still doing wonderful things, and a lot of that is attributed to the fact that the what I'm calling the CDPD group, the community driven product development team that we had pulled together of community members, they were making sure as the product was being developed that the developers were thinking about long-term viability, that they didn't have to do, if they did a 3.0, that it wouldn't really need to have a full-blown overhaul because the technology had grown, but that they could do other things with the existing technology to expand it, which is largely what's happened. And it's been a lot longer than the 10 years that this thing has been around, right? So that's one great example. It not only helped make the product better, it helped make the launch much more successful. We even got a Wired cover story out of it because we were of what we were doing with bringing the fans into that product development cycle.
I'm a
Uh,
little surprised by call it like the punchline of that story. I thought that this story was going to end with the developers understanding why backwards compatibility was important. I'm sure there are examples of community-driven product development that result in the the team recognizing they need to make X, Y, and Z changes and go in this different direction. And then examples like this one where it sounds like the biggest impact was actually almost back in a marketing sense of this is a like this was built by the community. The community is part of this, so trust us when we make this big change. Does it tend to go both ways? Was this unusual or unexpected that it went this direction that it did?
well, in that example, I think it went both ways. That the product improved because of that input
Okay.
from the community. I mean, the fact that it's still around and kicking and selling regularly is a testament to that.
Mhm.
Um, it also just did really good things with lowering the risk of launching a new product like that because there was a an instant appetite for it, which every product team, certainly every product marketer wants to see happen, right? That it's not just launching and then hoping that you build some audience over time, but on day one you've got people going, "Whoa, tell me more! I want this thing. I'm going to check it out." Right? Um, So I think it hit on all of those. I'll give you one more case study,
Yeah.
and this one's a little quicker, a little bit more recent. But I worked with a company that makes launch monitors for golfers. So if you're out hitting into a net in the backyard, uh, you put a little device behind you, and it kind of tracks where the ball's going and shows you on your phone,
Oh,
all the
cool.
stats about head speed and spin axis and all that sort of thing, but also what direction it's going. So you can tell would this have actually, if I was on the course, would this have actually gotten to the green or not? Um, and we built a CDPD group for them as they were at about 75% completion of that product. And part of that was, again, this is sort of all these projects are as much about how do we launch effectively and how do we improve the product, right? And there's others I'll tell you, other benefits I'll tell you about in a second, but those two exist in all these projects really. But one of the things that we realized very quickly, even though that project was started off being more about how do we launch this effectively, and ended up being, man, as soon as we put early release, very early release, pre-alpha type of products into the hands of the 40 people that we had in that group, um, there was a lot of feedback about some of the Bluetooth connectivity almost instantly. And there was a lot of discussion with the product team, and more specifically the developers themselves, about, well, we're not seeing that in the lab. Well, we're not seeing that behavior. And the product managers having to say, yeah, but we've got people in the field that are seeing it consistently enough that we need to really take a step back and reshape this approach to how we're going to finish this product out. So that really was it was a different thing. You wouldn't necessarily put that level of access and pre-release product in the hands of beta testers, right? You wouldn't wait that long, and you wouldn't get more generic testing done at that early stage, right? So we kind of combined the best of both worlds, where we were getting the small group, 40 still relatively small number of people, but the 40 were in there testing stuff that was early on. We were controlling that environment. We were really getting conversations happening between the product management team and the CDPD group, so that they could have actual back and forth conversations, not just about the Bluetooth stuff, but everything else. How are you responding to the app? What are the favorite features you're seeing? Right. The product marketers were really excited to be hearing well in advance of starting their campaign design what was causing people to react and how. And so, how do we early on understand, again, through a relational activity, not just a surveying mechanism, not a voice of the customer research, again, all good tools, just not relational. And so much of what people really get excited about or respond to comes from having conversations, right? Not just me answering a question from you as you sit across the table from me, but as we build relationship and as I start to create comfort in thinking about what I'm doing, as I spend some time with it, as we interact, as you tell me more, I tell you more, we start to see connections that don't exist, right? The value of relational activity instead of data analytics.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned beta testing and a few other tactics that people use that are in this arena. Can you help me differentiate more between CDPD and beta testing and some of these other things, and what makes this approach that you've been doing with Lego, with this golf company, so unique?
Yeah. And I think that, again, all these pieces are elements of good strategy, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't want to start off a project that didn't have some voice of the customer research. But once I have that, how do I understand how to interpret it, to apply it, to pressure test it with real voices, instead of what happens now is typically we take a lot of that research up front and we have some interpretations based on the research itself. But then when we take that into the product development cycle, that kind of disappears in a way, right? Because now we have to start as developers saying, well, what do I think they meant by that? Or how is that going to apply here? And then we wait this period of time to really put that in front of those same voices, right? The same people or different people having similar opinions, until we get to a beta test process. And the biggest issue with beta testing, whether it's software or real products or games or whatever it is that you've spent so much time already doing so much work that by the time you get to beta testing, you're not really checking for alignment with the user need or desire, right? It is more about verifying that the thing works. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, it ain't going to fundamentally change during the beta test process unless it's fundamentally broken, right? And we don't ever want to get to that point, because what a waste of time and energy it would be to get to a beta test at the end when we're almost ready to release and realize, man, this is having some challenges, right? And so, again, it goes back to, I use that word relational in relation to the CDPD stuff a lot, because the value of that is creating comfort to share and discuss and think, and putting these small groups in a position where their brains can kick into gear, not just give you quick answers and be done, right? Yeah. And I think all of us need a minute to sort of really get going, right? Even this podcast, I'm sure by the end will be a lot more in depth and rich with content than when we first started talking about it, because we've started to engage and interact with each other. The same thing here. How do we give some space to create connection, not just between a user and a developer, but between the teams of people, right? Because developers, and I see this with product managers all the time. If you got a couple of product managers on a project, they'll start talking to each other about what they heard, and then they'll go and check it out. And one person in the group will say, well, yeah, I didn't like this. And the other person says, you sure? Here's what I was thinking. And they get, there's interaction and conversation that doesn't happen in the same way with testing that's really meant to say, did these 5 things work? Or upfront in the research where it's much more survey, again, data analytics, right? We're trying to get to the data points, not to see how the conversation plays out, to watch what gets people excited and engaged, or to make people see where the points were that they were confused, or how they get in. And again, without having to go to a formal activity of a 2-way mirror room, right, where you've got some random statistically valid group of people researching this stuff, because you have to stop what you're doing to move over to that and then assess it and come back to it, versus being able to, you turn to your left and you have your colleagues. What happens if you turn to your right and you've got a different group of colleagues, so to speak, right? They're not actually colleagues, but they're acting in a similar way of when it comes to the knowledge part.
Yeah, I love it. This makes perfect sense. It's a 2-way conversation, and it's a conversation that is with so much flow that you're having it in real time as you're developing, as you're working on the product, rather than it being 2 separate things where I have to stop developing to go and do research back and forth.
Right.
You're combining them. You're joining them at the hip.
Right. And of course, that whole time, all you're really doing is giving insights to the rest of the team, right? The support team can be listening to these conversations and knowing what issues they have to prepare for and train on before the product launches, and they start getting that feedback. Product marketing team is seeing what's exciting about the product in ways that often they don't understand until it's in the hands of real people. They can be testing along the way as much as the product team and the developers themselves, right?
I feel like you're putting a formal name to something that I'd been trying to figure out how to do at General Collaboration. The terminology that I had used was, you hear a lot about minimum viable product, and especially for an early stage startup like ours, a lot of companies are focused on, we want to get an MVP out there and we want to get it in users' hands. With our product, I framed things as a minimum triable product, and that we needed to build this minimum triable product. And then we intentionally didn't call it beta testing. We usually call it like alpha testing, but it was exactly what you're talking about, of bringing in small groups of users, getting them on this minimum triable product, and getting them in our case, we tended to use Slack. And then we do video calls over Zoom of like, how do we actually talk to these people, see them using the product, get feedback as they're using it, and have this be a continuous conversation versus, a 30-minute session and then I never see that person again. This is really cool.
And I'll bet all those groups that you brought in are now advocates for the product as soon as it's out there in the market, not just because they like the product, but because they like you. Right. They now have a connection to you.
Like they feel ownership in it. They feel like they shaped, and they truly did. They shaped the product that we grew into. So it's I can totally see how that worked for the Lego team and for how that brought across the entire community. We've definitely experienced that at GC as well. What kinds of businesses, you have a lot of experience. I'm sure you've seen this work really well. I'm sure you've also seen this work pretty poorly. What kind of businesses does CDPD work best for, make the most sense for? Are there any that it just doesn't make sense for?
I think so. I don't know that it doesn't make sense for anybody, because we all have customers. The customers all have a desire to give some level of feedback. But I'll say that I think both in how you implement and what you do with it, as well as what the product is, right? Because if I talked to an industrial adhesives manufacturer the other day, and at first glance, you'd think, industrial adhesives, who cares about that? Just give me the stuff and I'll use it. But think about the fact that there's a bunch of engineers out there at a bunch of different companies doing a bunch of different things, building cars, building devices, building microphones, building webcams, whatever, that all rely on those adhesives and the application tools to put them in play, right? And whether it's the designers that are trying to create something new and not have to use fasteners, so they want to use glues, but they need it to be a certain way. They also want to be learning from their colleagues and understanding how to give feedback. We tried it this one time and it didn't really work, in a way that's deeper than just, I submitted a form that said, in this temperature range, this thing didn't work in this application, right? That's helpful, but they if you've ever met engineers at an industrial adhesives company, you'll know that they're as excited about their work as anybody else is with their work, right?
Mhm.
They want to connect with the companies making the stuff that makes their jobs possible. They want to do really cool, interesting things, and they want to be able to have voice in how that becomes possible, right? Now, there's some companies, Lego is a lot easier than an industrial adhesives company because everybody involved kind of understood I want to participate, right?
Mhm.
Where they go wrong and where it's not as easy, I won't say it's not possible or value, but where it's not as easy is in places where you have to convince everybody that this is a good idea, right?
What's the pushback usually? Like who says no and why?
So there's a number of pushbacks that I hear. One is this is just one more thing to do. One is that uh, this is not really going to be helpful. They don't know our business, right? I'll use that in industrial adhesives example. They don't know how we make our product. What can they add of value to us, right? That's one of them. That that there's no way to protect secrecy. Uh, and if we get people from the outside into the company, things will leak out. These are the sorts of things that, but a lot of times it's the overhead, right?
Yeah.
It's our engineer. We don't have time. We've got too much on our plate already. You're adding one more thing to do. And the answer I always give to that is that if you're only thinking about your engineering in terms of the cycles to create, then you're completely missing what it takes to sell afterwards, right? And if you can be building advocacy while you design, and it takes slightly longer to do that, but you have a more successful launch, more successful product, you more successful drive towards revenue, why wouldn't you do that, right? That's a cohesive view,
Yeah.
not an individual component view. I always use the fighter pilot axiom of slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? That sometimes just by taking a deep breath instead of getting pigeonholed into a thing or into a path that is the way you've always done stuff, and so therefore you're going to always do it that way, and that's the easiest, fastest way because we've always done it that way. Getting out of that kind of mindset can be much faster in the long run.
Mhm.
But you have to slow down to see what's in front of you, because the smoothness is what's really creating good speed, not just speed for speed's sake, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of those kinds of myths about they're not going to add value. It's just going to slow us down. It's one more thing to do. What do they know anyway? Those sorts of things.
Mhm.
So that's the overview.
For our audience on the podcast in particular, like we're talking to product managers, founders, people that tend to be working at earlier stage startups. And as you're describing the downfalls, you're giving me PTSD from earlier startup experiences. And I feel like now as a third time founder, I've I've learned some of your ways. I've been indoctrinated into understanding the value of getting this feedback. But specifically, you're making me go back to my most recent startup. Before this was called Robin Health. We were an on-demand pharmacy. We delivered prescription drugs on demand, and this is back when like Uber for X was a hot thing. And we were so focused on speed. We were so focused on getting our product out the door. And we in particular were so attached. My co-founder had a young kid at the time, and our origin story was his daughter needed a Z-Pack for strep throat in the middle of the night. And God damn it, we were going to solve that problem. We were building this in San Francisco, where like there are, I think, like twice as many dogs as there are kids. And we were building this at a time when there were a bunch of new medications that were coming to market. We were like, where are the Z-Packs? We want to be focused on families. And all we kept delivering were erectile dysfunction meds, hair loss meds, and then PrEP, which is a medication taken predominantly by gay men to help avoid the contraction of HIV. We were like, get this stuff away from me. We want the kids. We want the families. We want these Hims, Roman. None of those businesses existed then. If we had taken the time to listen to our users and to do this sort of get this sort of feedback, we would have been pulled in the direction of an amazing opportunity. And instead, we were so laser focused on the problem that we wanted to solve that we didn't see the problem that the market wanted us to solve. So I think there's just so much value in what you're saying of making this part of your company's DNA, taking the time to do this.
Right.
I'd love to shift into tactics and kind of break it down of what are the ways to get started, and then I'll circle back after and want to know like what are the more advanced tactics. But when you're working with a client like say general collaboration, or let's just say earlier stages startups, what are the tactics that you tell them to start with? What's like the easiest way to get started with implementing these tactics?
Yeah. So let me, before I jump into tactics, let me piggyback off the story you just told, because
Sure.
one of the things that I think is super critical about community engagement generally, this idea of direct customer engagement, how do you find ways to really to bring that voice of the customer into your company?
Mhm.
And I don't mean through reports. I mean actual people saying actual things where you can see them saying them, right? It may be a video. I've done those many times before, where I'll go out to a community event and just take a bunch of, videos on my iPhone and then take them back and show executives what people are saying. There's a very rich, powerful value in that sort of conversation
Mhm.
and storytelling in a way that doesn't. I can show you spreadsheets, I can show you reports, I can show you data analytics all day long. And I can also show you one person saying, I'm enthusiastic, I love it, and this was a problem. And the human brain is much more designed to hear that one voice than all the data in the world,
Mhm.
right? No matter how compelling that data is, we're just wired for relational connection. That's who we are as humans. And so being able to talk to a founder who may say, like in your example, like we want to do this market. Yeah, we're having super success with that, but I don't want to do that. I want to do this other thing. There's a bunch of ways, this is partially tactics here, but if you're a product manager, a community manager, or a VP of product, whatever it might be, you've got some responsibility to really listen to where the success is going to be instead of where you want it to be.
Mhm.
Then those voices become super, super powerful, right? And whether it's in a formal program like a CDPD program, or whether it's just literally going out to that audience and saying, what do you think? Come tell us, right? There's some of the most amazing experiences I've had in business are when I've brought in 3 or 4 people, flown them in, had them sit down in a room with a bunch of people from the company and let them ask questions with me, just kind of keeping everything within the guardrails,
Mhm.
right? And it is miraculous. In fact, after those sessions, I often have to say, okay, slow down. I know that they were saying these things. We have to do a little bit of interpretation and context setting first before we run off. But the switch between there's nothing of value to, oh my God, we got to listen to everything they're saying is supreme when you get real people, warm bodies in front of other warm bodies, right? It's really powerful. And I think it helps to skip over some of those entrenched ideas that we tend to get without some of those social connections, or human connections.
Yeah.
So to your tactics, there are, in my methodology, there's sort of 2 big things I talk about. One is the big 4, which is, all these programs really come down to finding the right people, putting them in at the right time, focused on the right outcomes, and using the right activities to keep things moving.
Mhm.
Right. So I'll talk very briefly about each one of those 4. Finding the right people. I've talked about this before. Recruiting the right voices that are representative, that are going to be embraced by the team that you're working with, that have diversity of thought and opinion as much as diversity of demographics. Right. I really, sometimes you design these where they're all, specifically designed programs for people with high levels of experience. Other times it's for people with very low levels of experience, and often it's a collection of all the above, right?
Mhm.
And in a way that makes the right balance for whatever you're trying to achieve strategically. So that's, finding the right people. The second one is putting them in at the right time. So when I say the right time, I mean within the project scope. We may bring in 3 people for a one-off brainstorming session that is an all-day session, like I just talked about, and put them in front of the team before any real work starts, just to sort of help contextualize some of the data that we have and the ideas that we have. We may find a group of 5 or 10 people that we can put in early on in the development cycle that may only last a couple of months.
Hmm.
Or we may build a program at the 50 or 60% complete mark, that's 20 or 30 or 40 people, right? Knowing that when you get these bigger groups, about half of them participate actively, right? So if you get a group of 40 people, 20 of them will participate actively or so. That's just kind of how group dynamics work, right? But you keep them in well past the launch, right? But you kind of find the right ways to put those people in at the right time. And of course, all this is business outcome focused, right? This isn't just trying to drive marketing for marketing's sake, right? We are really trying to change business outcomes, and hopefully more than one, right? I always talk about the community work being kind of the octopus theory of every action in the community perspective that you do has 8 tentacles that reach out into various parts of the business for various reasons. So, finding, are the outcomes we're looking for about really making sure the product's dialed in? Is it about product marketing? Is it about, post-launch advocacy? Is it all of the above? Do we have a problem to solve versus how are we trying to avoid problems? Right. But really thinking about, like with any good strategy design, program design, what are we here for? Right. What's the business objectives we're trying to achieve? And then the last one is, how do we keep the members excited and enthusiastic with the right activities? Mm-hmm. And that may be, within the scope of the timeline. If it's a one-day session, we want to make sure that that's a really interesting one-day session. If there's a company store on site, we're going to make sure to take them to the company store as much as we keep them involved in that ideation session, right? Mm-hmm. If it's an ongoing 6-month-long project, what's our regularity of meeting, right? Are we going to have a once a week or once every 2 weeks Zoom call with everybody to be there? Are we sending out weekly updates? Are we asking for, a very specific ritual from the members that's not necessarily project related once a week just to keep them engaged? What are all those just general community building things that keep these people excited to be there? Mm-hmm. Because it is a two-way street. My mantra for community has always been 20 plus years now, everybody goes home happy, right? So what is we're being happy because as a company, we're getting really great input. We're getting great feedback and, testing ideas and all that stuff. That's great. What are they getting out of it? Why is this exciting for them? Are they going to be able to talk about it afterwards? Is it something that they can actually put on their LinkedIn resume if it's work oriented? Are the activities just fun? Are we sending them little tchotchkes along the way to keep them engaged? I've gotten more out of a thank you note, handwritten thank you note, than I've gotten out of, $500 boxes of stuff sometimes, right? But what are all those pieces that we're doing to really make this an enjoyable, exciting experience for them?
Mm-hmm. I see with a lot of earlier stage startups, a lot of startups in general, the check the box community thing these days seems to be they create a Slack and they invite a bunch of their users into the Slack, and I have chosen not to do it yet, but I wonder if there's I'd love to get your feedback on if there's a right way to do that. Is there value in that? Is that the best way to dip your toe into this sort of community driven product design? Or is that a mistake and a waste of time? I just got invited into one the other day, and all it is right now is a bunch of people introducing themselves, and I don't give a shit about who any of these people are, and I don't see the value of getting introduced to all of them. I love the tool, but do I need the community with the tool? I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions in there. I'll kind of pull apart several things. So one is, I don't think it's inherently not worthwhile, but I will say any activity done without much thought usually ends poorly, right? And especially on the community side, if you're thinking, oh, we just want our community members to be in a place, and the more they talk about it, it'll create advocacy, and then we'll all win and we'll all be billionaires. There's not enough thought in that. Again, back to the everybody goes home happy experience. Mm-hmm. As a company, I want my customers to be there and talking about how great my product is. Have you thought about, and this is where, I've been doing community stuff a long time, and I can't tell you how many conversations about community start where I'm saying, time out. Have you thought about what's actually going to make them excited to be here, to want to show up, right? Is there limited access? Is there specific value to being here? Are there tangibles that they get, physical goods that they get because they're participating? But typically there's, in any good community, there's a higher purpose, right? That's not just about me transactionally getting something. It's about me being part of something bigger than myself.
Mhm.
And so, this is where a lot of software manufacturers, I think, or developers go sideways. Is they say, I have a tool, it does a thing, it's a really good tool for that thing. I'm sure there's a community around it. Let's get everybody on board. But often that tool isn't really what they're there for. It's the thing the tool serves, right? It's not just a single inbox for your notifications. It's the development cycle, right? It's you saying, we understand you so well that we created a tool just for you. And we want to because we have such a deep understanding of who you are, we want to create a place for you to talk about that approach to doing business,
Mhm.
right? And often that gets missed. And so somebody just says, I'm going to start a Slack, I'm going to start a Discord. Everybody shows up. They show up and get an introduction because they think it's a self-serving value, right? I need a job. I'll give a great intro. Somebody will see my great intro and hire me. Well,
Mhm.
that's not really what that Slack was there for, right? And what somebody's trying to do is fill in the gaps for finding value where there wasn't any value proposition established in the first place. But yes, that right now there's a lot of this, we're going to start a Discord because why? Because reasons.
Mhm.
And then it doesn't work. And then they go, oh, we don't like community. I'm always a much bigger fan. If we're going to default to something, start small and grow,
Mhm.
right? I'd much rather start with 5 people. I'm a community guy, right? You'd think I'd be wanting to build the biggest, most powerful communities in the world. I run an event, 2 events. Both of them have the same structure, though. Once a month, there's 5 people I get together to talk about issues in a way that 5 people can talk about that 15 or 50 or 150 could not talk about, right? Because there's an intimacy and a value there that creates amazing connection and community, right? I'm using my quotey fingers. It's not community like we think about these big, broad platforms or unlimited access type of communities. But it is community, right? It is a gathering of people connecting for some purpose bigger than themselves. They want to talk about their issues related to either customer experience or related to AI. And they're getting together with other smart people that they know that I have vetted, and therefore the conversation will be fantastic, right? And I'd much rather start there and figure out how to grow and have
Mhm.
a really good, successful, repeatable model first, and then figure out how to start expanding it instead of jumping in and saying by default anyway. There's plenty of examples where there's value in saying there's enough of an audience out there, there's enough of a purpose out there that when we put those things together, we might as well start big. But to your point, your question was about these like startups and software developers, that sort of thing. I'm always much more interested in finding out how do we start small and grow. How do we plant a seed and expand from there instead of trying to go big and potentially falling on our faces.
Do you think it makes sense to so I've kind of talked myself out of creating the like general collaboration community Slack, or even like I've considered like do I make the minimum viable product community Slack? There are this could just be maybe some imposter syndrome. I feel like there are already such great communities that I'm a part of
Mm-hmm.
that are no, they're not to the point of like benefiting my product or necessarily any product, but the two that immediately come to mind to me are Lenny's List, which is such a like great, thriving product management community, and then here in New York, where I am, there's this guy Andrew Young who has like he gets written up as like the Gatsby of Silicon Valley in New York City or whatever, and he hosts great tech events. I've been hesitant to form community around GC or around the MVP podcast because I see that void being filled elsewhere. Have you worked with founders with companies to tap into existing communities,
Oh
or do
yeah.
you typically recommend that they like build their like even as I do that, do I build my own? How do you navigate those trade-offs?
Yeah, I think and it's a very good question. We're kind of stepping away from the CDPD and into sort of the broader community strategy, which is fine. That's what CDPD falls under.
Mhm.
But from a larger community standpoint, you don't have to create your own. And often, I worked at Lego for 6 years and never built a community of my own. There was not one. There was plenty of community activity happening. My goal was, as the global community lead, was to figure out how to participate where other things were happening to make them bigger and better. Right. My job, it was to help. I always joked it was the whisper in the king's ear to say, have you ever thought about, the king says, we should do this thing. And, I'd go to events and I'd help them understand how to get media attention. I'd whisper in their ear and say, if you invited the public here, it'd be a lot of fun to see all these kids reacting to these amazing creations you guys have just put together for this weekend's event. Right. And doing a lot of that stuff that helped push the community, which helped push the brand, right? And the association that people had with the company being good global participants, so to speak. So in your case, yeah, there's plenty of communities out there right now, and especially these days. I have a Slack community for the CX Sessions event. But when I started that event 6 years ago, I started the Slack because there wasn't a lot of places for senior folks to meet up and talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Well, now my Slack is lousy with channels that I follow that are all fantastic. And adding one more channel to that, I don't know if there's any value in that for somebody like you that's, trying to get your word out. Mm-hmm. You dedicating resources not to build your own, but to participate in something else, that could be a huge, huge benefit to you, right? Because now you're out there as a member of the community that already exists, instead of trying to say, don't go there, come over here to mine, right? Mm-hmm. And again, these are all sort of strategic decisions, but you don't have to go one way or the other. There's a framework called the Presence Framework that talks about home base, which is the .coms, right? So your website, your tools, the stuff you own through and through, right? That's home base. The next ring out is the outposts. So places like Facebook or Slack or somewhere else where it's somebody else's technology. They run the technology, but it's your space on their technology. Mm-hmm. And then you've got passports as the furthest out ring, where you're going into other communities as a visitor, as a welcomed guest, whatever it might be. But you don't have your own stand there, so to speak, at the farmer's market, right? You're going and participating with what's already happening. You're doing it with a very clear connection to you as a brand, mm-hmm. and a business, so that people can see, hey, you're a real person. This is, again, people love to support individuals. They don't like to support entities, mm-hmm. right? I'm sure I like Nike and I'm a Nike loyalist, but I know some people at Nike, which gives me a whole different level of connection to the brand. Right. You have a great tool, but I know you. And so I'm much more interested and engaged in supporting you, not just your company. Right. And so the more you can show real people and real presence of humans out there in the world, whether it's on your site, whether it's in those outposts, or especially when it's out in the passports, where you're just showing up in existing communities and saying, hey, I'm doing something cool. I know things. I'm nice. I'm interesting when I post. And people start to gravitate towards that, right? And that's a more of a community engagement strategy itself than it is a platform discussion, right?
Jake, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground in terms of how to do community-driven product development, how to do community in general, how to do it at big companies and what to learn from those big companies, then how we can apply that at smaller companies. Would love to close on just where can people follow you, get in touch with you? What's the best way to continue to learn and to put some of these in practice, maybe with your help?
Yeah. So it's a good question. That's my work. So I do consulting where I help companies of all sizes figure out how to build these either CDPD programs or direct customer engagement programs. So you can find me at jakemckee.com. And if you go to jakemckee.com/CDPD, Community Driven Product Development, there's a whole bunch more information about the CDPD methodology itself.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast today. And,
thanks for having me.
Thanks for all your help. Have a great day.
Bye. Thanks.